Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here on such a glorious day. Thank you for forsaking the sunshine for a little while. And maybe it's a little cooler where you are than it would be if you were outside. It's 85 degrees outside this afternoon. And I'm glad that I'm inside air conditioning rather than outside. But nonetheless, it would be nice to have some sunshine inside, but that's just not doable. In any event, welcome this afternoon for the last Foundation Impact Research Group seminar of the spring semester. Happy to report to you that I think we've already got a full schedule for the fall semester, but we're not going to announce it today. But we do have it. We have the commitments there, and even I think most of the dates. But it's a particular pleasure to welcome Adam Falk here to our midst and hear about the a good deal, I hope, of interest to you about the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. I should tell you that Adam is, I think, if my memory is correct, is the first theoretical physicist we've ever had present to this group. So I hope that you all will find it especially interesting and not surprised by that fact. Adam is a graduate of I think they stopped using the Latin, but I would say a summa cum laude graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as a PhD from Harvard. And he was, before taking on the role of being president of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, he was president of Williams College, which is on anybody's list among the best liberal arts colleges in the country. And I'm told that he did a lot to strengthen Williams College beyond what it was before, which is really great. I should tell you that the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, I think, is unique among foundations in the extent to which it has a number of different seemingly unrelated programs in which they make grants. And it does everything from supporting the production of Broadway plays that are thought to provide information about the public understanding of science. And and I'd say Adam will talk more about it, but all foundations where donors were pretty energetic in deciding what they wanted to do. I think it was Alfred P. Sloan himself, and Adam can confirm it, who felt that an important role for the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which had from the beginning a strong interest in science, should also have a program on the public understanding of science. And what's interesting to me is that if they weren't supportive of that idea, they wouldn't have done what they did. It started out publishing books, and then they decided, well, people are getting an education about science from television, from Broadway plays. They in fact supported the production of Broadway plays dealing with science. And I don't want to take too much away from what Adam's going to say, but all I can say is that when I look at the menu of programs that the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation has undertaken and has lived up to, I find it fascinating. And also I should tell you that the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation was the first foundation to provide support for the creation of the Terry Sanford, what is now the Terry Sanford Institute School of Public Policy at Duke, literally the first one. And it was emblematic of the interest of the Sloan Foundation that they provided the money for us to create a joint major in engineering and public policy, which marries some of the interests. So without spilling too much of the beans, what Adam's going to say, I just want to welcome him and say how really wonderful it is to have you here with us this afternoon. I wish only the circumstances were such that we could have had you here in person. And there's always the possibility, if you do well this afternoon, to be invited back when we actually will have you in person. But in any event, for the moment, it's an honor to have you here. And I appreciate all of you all who have come out to hear what Adam has to say about science and philanthropy and anything else he chooses to talk about. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Joel. It really is great to be with all of you. And I am sorry I can't be there in person. I do have deep ties to the area. I grew up in Chapel Hill. I have family in Chapel Hill. I went to the North Carolina School of Science and Math. I spent my summers teaching at the Talent Identification Program, TIP, at Duke on the East Campus.
Yeah.
I've been rooting against your basketball team with every fiber of my being for 50 years. So I'm sorry to make the tournament this year. So it's just great to be here, and I really wish that I could be in there in person with all of you. What I'd like to do is take some time, probably about half an hour, tell you a little bit about the Sloan Foundation. I mean, Joel's given a good introduction, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. And then I do actually want to try to live up to the title that I gave you, which is to talk about opportunities that I see for a foundation like ours and talk about responsibilities that I think a foundation like ours has. And then hopefully leave plenty of time for your questions and comments and good advice for me. So let me give you a brief history of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. It was founded by Alfred P. Sloan, and he was essentially the creator of the modern General Motors. He ran General Motors for about 3 decades, got his start actually making ball bearings, made the best ball bearings in the country. And it turned out that in the early days of the automotive industry, ball bearings were pretty important. So General Motors, or what became General Motors, bought his ball bearing company, and then he burrowed inside and rose to the leadership and really invented this idea of a distributed kind of large company, manufacturing company with different divisions and this whole way of organizing industrial activity, and made a fortune doing that. Early on in 1934, just as he, in starting his tenure leadership of Sloan, founded the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and was very committed to putting his wealth to good use while he was still alive, and in fact led the foundation for the first few decades that it ran. And his idea was essentially that kind of rational thought and research and careful accounting of economic principles and physical principles was the key to the success of the country, and that he wanted to support those ideas in his foundation. Early on, that included management, and the Sloan School at MIT came from his support, and it included biomedicine, Memorial Sloan Kettering. Also, Kate Kettering was another executive at General Motors. That came from his support. And after he started those institutions, he decided that neither of those areas were going to be part of what the Sloan Foundation was going to support anymore. So we support science and economics, but not biomedicine and not management, right? So if you kind of think that constrains, sometimes I think that we are the complement to the Mellon Foundation. Right. So academically, we support what they don't, and they support what we don't. He ran the foundation until almost until his death, until very late in life, into the early 60s. And he left behind, he was very wise about kind of understanding and articulating what it was he wanted to leave as his legacy. He wanted a foundation that was going to exist in perpetuity. And he understood that perpetuity is a very long time. And that it is hard, you really don't, if you're going to do that, you have to acknowledge that the world will develop in ways that you cannot anticipate, and that your foundation, in order to be impactful, is going to have to develop in ways that give freedom to those who run it later, but still those people need to be guided by a sense of your values and your priorities. And he left behind, I think, just the right amount of guidance. He also left behind no heirs. And I encourage you that if you are, as much as I love heirs, if you are going to run a foundation, choose one without any heirs, because we can be guided by our own interpretation, which I think is faithful and genuine, but it is our interpretation of what Alfred P. Sloan had in mind. And I think he was very wise in kind of thinking about that. So what do we, so let me talk a little then about what we support, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we value. And I'm going to show you one slide. I promise this is the only screen sharing I'm going to do, but I want to share this one slide with you because I think it articulates what it is that we have. So everyone can see this, I hope. it is, the other thing that Sloan left behind was an endowment, I should say, of about $2 billion, which gives us about $100 million a year in payout. And we spend about 15% of that to run the foundation, and the other 85% goes out the door to support the work that we support. And the area, so this is a slide, I'm going to take us through it, which kind of are meant to articulate the pieces of what we do and how they fit together. So we support science, technology, and economics. And I think we're driven by 4 core questions, and I'll go through them. What can we learn? How is research done? Who participates in research and this research, and why does it matter? So what, how, who, and why? So starting with what? So we fund research, and rigorous research in particular program areas. And I'll give you many examples. Programs tend to come and go on a kind of decadal time scale. I think the one that we've been running for the longest is something called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is, I could talk for an hour about that. I promise not to, but it has really transformed observational astronomy by doing big surveys of objects in the sky. Published, thousands of papers come out of that. Behavioral macroeconomics is a current program that we have. We have a program in energy and the environment, which is kind of energy economics and social science issues around the low carbon energy transition that we are going through. We have a small program in tabletop particle physics, which I would love to take an hour and tell you about, but I promise I won't. This is some examples, but I think the point here is that there's at the heart of what we do is rigorous research in particular areas. But one of the core recognition that we have is that all of this research takes place in a context. It takes place in a social context, and it takes place in an institutional context. And we have to be interested, we are interested in those contexts as much as we are interested in the research, because we understand that unless we do that, we can't get the research that we want. So the ecosystems that support research, we also make funding in. A lot of research depends on scientific software that's open source. We have supported open source scientific software. For economics research, we have supported administrative data and uses of large data sets that aren't the results of surveys, but are produced by companies and in other ways in order to further economics research, a key resource for them. We've done funding in scholarly communication, particularly around new technologies and how they interact there. And research itself on the economics of science, turn the lens of research onto the scientific process itself. And again, these are just examples of what I mean by our funding in the areas of the ecosystems that support research. Third, we're really interested in who does it. And the people and the communities who do research have to be supported as well. The most prominent way we do this is a program that for well over half a century has supported young faculty members in the first few years before they have tenure in a variety of fields: economics, physics, chemistry, and a few other scientific fields. We make about, these are called the Sloan Research Fellows. We make about 120 or so of these awards every year. They're not large awards, but they're very impactful. Once we give an award, the fellow can use it for anything that she or he wants to. We have had more than 50 former Sloan Research Fellows win the Nobel Prize, and including the last 3 physics Nobel Prizes had a former Sloan Research Fellow sharing them, including, I might add, 2 of those were women. So 2 of the 4 women to win the Nobel Prize in physics were former Sloan Research Fellows, and in the last 3 years. And the Clark Medal, which is the early career medal in economics, has been won by a former Sloan Research Fellow every year for 10 or 20 years. So these are really high quality awards and really impactful. We're deeply interested in diversity and inclusion in STEM and economics. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, so I won't say much now, except to say that this is, fundamentally about the idea that everybody needs to be able to, encouraged to, supported in participating in this, great activity, which is scientific research. Equally, we're interested in the representation in the media of underrepresented people in science. And you turn on your television, you look at the the news, and scientists look like me, and they're often wearing lab coats. And that is, does not reflect the diversity of science. So if I take something like Hidden Figures, which is a book that we supported through our books program, which I'll say a word about, that is a book which talks about, how we got to the moon, but it also is powerful in that it shows that it was people of color and women of color who were critical in getting us to the moon. And it's very important to show that and to have people understand that when they're thinking about who is a scientist. And then we do some emergency interventions. We have supported over the years threatened scientists in countries in which there are not the kind of political freedoms that we have in our country. And then finally, we're interested in this question of why does it matter? Science and economics in the wider world. And a big part of this is our public understanding of science and economics program, which involves books, film, theater, radio, television. It's based around the idea that there's, getting the public to appreciate science and economics is about more than just explaining. Scientists love, you can see from the last 10 minutes, we love to explain, we love to talk. We love to, and we think that if people, don't understand what we're saying, we should say it again and maybe louder and more length. But in fact, there are other ways to reach people, and we support, as Joel mentioned, Broadway plays that have science in them, and we support, books that are about scientists. We support a television that has science themes, and in that way, kind of try to break down that two cultures that C.P. Snow talked about, that divide between those two cultures, and get people to see science as a human activity that people like them engage in. We have a universal access to knowledge program. Again, in the wider world, we were one of the largest donors to Wikipedia back when people weren't sure that was a good idea, but we thought it was a good idea, and we've been deeply engaged in that. And then finally, I'll say that we are committed to doing impartial research on controversial issues. And that, I think, goes to, that's it for the slide, it goes to one of our deepest values, which is kind of impartiality and avoiding taking public positions. So I'll give you an example. If you look at the foundations that fund in the climate space, literally 99% of that funding is for advocacy. And so we don't fund advocacy. That is, you go around the foundation, we deeply believe as individuals that we need to do something now and serious and aggressive about global warming and the impact that's having on the climate. We fund all sorts of things that have that kind of impact of addressing that issue, but we don't do policy advocacy. And part of the reason that we don't do policy advocacy is that because everybody else is doing that. And in fact, you need real research. You need to know whether, weatherization programs really work, right? You need to know whether it's possible to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so there's a space that we want to occupy. But the other thing that we want to do is avoid compromising our researchers when they go into the public sphere to give testimony about issues of public importance. So for example, I'll give a different example involving the census. We were very interested, we have been doing funding around our kind of administrative data around issues that have to do with collecting data about people, including the census, and have funded people who study the census and the kind of the statistical frames that are used and so forth. If we came out and expressed public concern about the census, which we certainly had last year, when some of our grantees went to testify to Congress and it was known they were a Sloan grantee, they might be compromised by being accused of having an agenda. So our refusal to have a public agenda is meant to protect our grantees who are working in spaces that have public policy implications. So we step back from that, and we think that's a very important space to occupy, particularly in the current environment. It doesn't mean that we don't care deeply about these issues, but institutionally we don't take stands on them. And we really believe in rigor. And sometimes I think that we're a cross between a philanthropy and the NSF, right? I mean, the way we look at grants, the way we think about what we do. So that's all a way of kind of saying that's who we are. And I would say that a foundation has to know what it is and what it isn't. And it's not that we think that this is the only way or the best way to be a foundation or to be a philanthropy, but it's our way to be a philanthropy. And we think we occupy a space that's important and valuable. And there are a lot of things we don't do that are worth doing, but we don't do them, right? And I think that fidelity to who we are, to what's on that, the kind of philosophy that's reflected on that slide I showed you, and the ways in which those questions mutually reinforce each other. And the best grants that we do touch on more than one of those questions. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is this big, again, as I said, a big astronomical survey, produced a lot of papers about science, but it also changed the way people do astronomy. And it also made the data public so that amateur astronomers out there in the world could use that data. So it didn't just touch the what question, it touched the how and the why, and frankly, the who question as well, because associated with the Sloan Digital Sky Survey are some really great programs that are making astronomy more diverse and inclusive. So that's who we are. And yeah, I think it is a special foundation. I don't think that there are others a lot like it. So with that, let me talk a little bit about opportunities and responsibilities that I see kind of at this moment that we face. I think the core opportunity for any foundation is to find things that other funders, especially in our case, government funders, can't or won't do. And $80 million, $85 million is a lot of money to give away. But in some ways, it's not a lot of money when you think about the spaces in which we're giving it. I mean, science, the National Science Foundation is $1 billion, I mean, billions of dollars, right? If you throw in the NIH, you throw in the Department of Energy and the other NOAA, and you've got all of the agencies that fund science. And so we have to think very carefully about the money that we spend and whether there's a reason that our contribution can have a disproportionate difference for some structural reason. So if I think, for example, about science, we want to do, this is why we do very targeted programmatic funding. We don't fund anything that comes over the transom. We try to find areas where we think that with our scale of resources, and let's say maybe our research is $15, $20 million a year, our scale, we can have an impact. So how might that be, right? Beyond being focused in terms of area. We're interested in very often in interdisciplinary research that can fall between the cracks in the funding agencies. Research that's more speculative sometimes. And one of the things that's really hard in science these days is that it seems you have to have done half the work and presented as preliminary results before you get the grant, right? So it's very hard right now for in a lot of fields to do work that's speculative. And I kind of want to use that word instead of risky, because risky sounds like you don't know what you're doing. Speculative means you don't know what you're going to find out. And I think we have an interest in that. I mean, in fact, we have an opportunity really to have a portfolio way of thinking about risk. And I think within a program, we can fund some things that are more speculative and some things that are safer, and a spectrum in there. And that we have the discretion to do that, right? And we try to take advantage of that discretion. It doesn't mean, I think I sometimes joke that boards of trustees love, risky research that is guaranteed to succeed. That's the best kind of risky research. And we can't promise our board we're going to do that. And we have some failures, and we should have some failures. That's okay. The other place that we look is where there are kind of structural barriers to obtaining funding. And I think some of those are things I've mentioned, that things can be interdisciplinary or speculative. Often young people are having a hard time getting funding, and often those things intersect with each other. There are young investigators in speculative areas using interdisciplinary methods. Some of those folks are going to do really exciting things, also in economics and as well as in science. And they're often the people who are being told, well, why don't you wait until you have tenure before you do that? Or we just don't want to take a chance on that. So those are the kinds of opportunities that we see there to kind of to step in and do something that that can make a difference, even if we're 1% of the funding that the National Science Foundation provides. A second opportunity is to do basic research, and I mentioned this before, but let me come back to it. Basic research in areas where there's already a lot of advocacy. So as I said, only 1% of philanthropy for climate change goes into impartial research. And so we see there's a real opportunity there to fund research, and that's impactful in the policy space, because it turns out that others aren't doing that. And similarly, research, again, as I mentioned before, when I was talking about our reluctance to do advocacy, similarly, there's a lot of, when you think about the census, there's a lot of money going into kind of the policy space, but really research on how you could use administrative data to improve the census, which is a kind of a solution for that problem, or one of the solutions to the problem. Not a lot of money going into that. And so, that's another kind of opportunity for us to occupy a space that we think we can be impactful. The other thing I'll say is that we're at a very interesting moment where there are one of the problems in our society is the increasing disparities between the very wealthy and the rest of us. But of course, the very wealthy are going to have to do something with all of that money in the end. And that's an opportunity in the philanthropic space, right? And so some of these folks have an interest in science, and some of them would like to be doing funding in science. But that's hard, it turns out. It's actually a lot easier to give your money away to an organization that is kind of obviously in a social space doing good than it is to know how to give it to scientists. And so my predecessor, Paul Joskow at the Sloan Foundation, and colleagues at a number of other foundations founded something called the Science Philanthropy Alliance a number of years ago to advise new philanthropists in how to do grant making in science, and how to put together scientific advisory boards, and how to separate wheat from chaff. One of the opportunities that has presented, first off, is to bring more philanthropic dollars into science, but also it's allowed our own existing science foundations to collaborate with each other in new ways. And that's actually very exciting. And I think for the Sloan, the values that I kind of talked about to be diffused into science philanthropy more broadly, and a kind of a way for us to show some leadership, which I think is valuable. In fact, one of our program directors, a guy named Evan Michelson, has just published a book, which I'm gonna, he'll get $3 if you buy this book. It's called Philanthropy and the Future of Science and Technology. And what the book is really about is a kind of a responsible research and innovation framing of modern science philanthropy, and how the intersection of science philanthropy and society can be thought about using kind of modern analytical tools. And it's really aimed at this entire space. So one of our opportunities at Sloan is to be leaders, right? Is to be leader. We don't have the most money, but to be kind of leaders in the values and the ways that people think about doing science. So that opportunity is also a responsibility. And I want to close my comments by talking a bit more about responsibilities that I think that we have. And I want to talk a little bit about three of them. The first of these is, I think, the importance of supporting institutions and not only supporting projects. And I think the earlier generation, if we think of the Carnegies and Rockefellers, that had built these enormous fortunes and then turned to philanthropy, they built institutions, right? In fact, there's so many Carnegie institutions that if you get all of the leaders of the Carnegie institutions in a room, you need a ballroom to do it, right? There's Carnegie this and Carnegie that. But this is a legacy, right, of that's just extraordinary impact on our society if you think of all the things named Carnegie, not to mention all of the public libraries that he built. And again, Rockefeller, Rockefeller University and so forth. They built institutions, right? And they didn't know always what those institutions were going to do, but they trusted in the leaderships of those institutions to make the world better, right? The fashion now is to do projects. and to view the institutions that are doing that work as kind of fixed and available to layer projects on top of. And I don't want to psychoanalyze why this is. I think we think of business more these days in terms of, move fast and break things, and be, the entrepreneurial. I think whatever you might have said about Carnegie and Rockefeller, I don't think that entrepreneurialism was the thing that drove them so much as, amassing huge, building all the railroads, right, and all the steel mills, right? I don't think the idea that you can move in quick, let alone if you're in finance, right, move in quick, take over a company, fix it in 18 months and sell it, right? That wasn't the way they thought. But I think much more of business has a shorter time scale thinking now. And investing does. And a lot of these fortunes are made by people who are very successful thinking in this way. And they're very smart people. And many of them are wonderful people. But they think of much more inclined to think of their philanthropy in terms of what is the thing I want to get done and who can get it done for me. Right? And I think the Gates Foundation, which has done a lot of good in this world, does not pay the kinds of indirect costs that the government does I'll talk a little bit about indirect costs because I believe in indirect costs. And so if you take too many grants from the Gates Foundation, it can bankrupt your School of Public Health, right? Because you actually can't keep the lights on and the doors and the place swept. And so that's not meant to be a real deep criticism of Gates. It's more of the kind of the culture of how a philanthropy is effective. We talk a language of return on investment. What's the marginal cost? What's the marginal utility? What can you do in the next 12 to 24 months? And I think that's misses the fact that these institutions that we rely on, in our case, the universities and research institutes, in the case of other philanthropies, the nonprofits and that are in the social space, that we have to support them too, and we really miss that. In fact, if you saw Darren Walker on 60 Minutes, he said this quite eloquently on Sunday night. It was a wonderful interview with him and Leslie, I think it was Leslie Stahl, I forget. But he said it's arrogant not to support the institutions. And at the Ford Foundation, they want to do much better about that. Indirect costs are the bane of every PI, but I was a PI and then I was a dean. So my view of indirect costs kind of changed. That is a kind of the indirect cost rate that the government pays is hammered out in blood between the government representatives and the institution, and is meant really to cover those costs that really are incurred when you do research, turning on the lights and hiring the administrative staff and paying some portion of the poor provost's salary, and all of those things really are there, and they come and measure every square foot. And at the end of the day, if you're the dean, you think, well, that didn't actually cover all of my costs, right? Because there's things that aren't allowed, and they're really important there. And I think that they represent real costs. And so the Sloan Foundation, foundations typically pay less in indirect costs than the government does. We have less money. Also, we typically allow universities to charge things like administrative support that the federal government doesn't allow. But we went last year and raised our indirect cost rate, kind of anathema in the foundation world, but we raised it from 15 to 20%. And you know what? My board looked at me and said, "That's great. You should." I had this whole plan to sell it to the board, and it took about 8 seconds because the board said, "Yeah, you have to support these universities and the work that they do." So that's one responsibility I think that we really have that's important. A second one that's really important, and I think I don't want to say that it somehow got more important last summer, because if it did, it means we were just not paying enough attention in the period before last summer, but we certainly are talking about it much more, and that's a really good thing. And that is diversity and inclusion in our grant making, in every aspect of the way that we support the work that we do. And Sloan, Joel was kind enough to say that Sloan has been, at the foundation, has been doing this for a long time now. And in ways over the decades that change as society changes. So Alfred P. Sloan in the early 50s made contributions to the United Negro College Fund, and that in the and to economics programs in women's colleges, because he felt that women were going to be, really needed to have economic knowledge. They were important in the economy of the country. I mean, that's not the way we do that in 2021. But I give great credit to Alfred P. Sloan for, as a person of his time, understanding how important this was. Sometimes we get hung up on this question of why racial justice is critical to, the grant making that we do. And I think we get hung up on, are we doing this because we believe in justice and the historical, righting the historical injustices in our country, of which there are many? Or do we do this because we think it's good for science and because diversity is good for science? Both. That is, I think, a false dichotomy to worry about the two. I would say, and this is really just me speaking, because of, and somebody who spent a long time in higher ed, because of the way that the legal environment has required higher ed to make the case for diversity, which has been, diversity is good for white people, so it's okay to support it, right? It's good for the academic environment. We have had to make this case. I think it's true, but it has kept us from making the case that it is simply justice as well. And one of the things I would like us to do is to just unabashedly talk about justice as much as we talk about the kind of the diversity case for better science. They are both true, but I think certainly as a foundation, we can be free to talk about justice. And that's one of the liberations of being at the Sloan Foundation. If I were to pull that together, I would say that, I've said to you that at the Sloan Foundation, we're deeply interested in the communities that do research, right? That if we want there to be better, better physics, right? We need a deeply functional community of physicists, and that means making sure that their institutions are strong. It means supporting the young ones through the Sloan Research Fellows, but it definitely means making sure that we do everything we can and that the field does everything it can to bring in people into physics from, or whatever the field is, from every corner of our society, every part of our society, people of every color, of every background, of every gender, of every orientation. That community needs that, and not just to count numbers, but to change these communities so that they are inclusive and supportive of the success of every single person that is in these communities. And I think that is an obligation that, frankly, every single institution of any kind in this country has had for a long time, but certainly needs to be thinking about right now, right? How is this institution going to change in ways that make it a place that everybody who comes can live up to their potential and be fully successful? And so we want to help institutions do that. We have a grant making program around that. But in addition to the grant making that we do, in fact, Duke is one of our grantees on our university centers for exemplary mentoring. It's, in fact, I'll say one of our very best grantees in that program, which brings students into a set of engineering and science, underrepresented students into a set of engineering and science graduate programs, doctoral programs, and supports them through that. So we have direct grant making there, but frankly, that's not enough. In every single grant that the Sloan Foundation makes, we insist on an account of how the work in that grant is going to further diversity and inclusion in whatever field that grant is in whatever ways are appropriate to that grant. And we take that seriously. We will not put a grant through until we are satisfied about that dimension of it. So it's foundational to the work that we do. If all that we do is get papers out of our scientific funding and we don't get stronger communities, we have not taken advantage of the opportunity we have or lived up to our responsibility. The last responsibility I want to say something about is intergenerational equity. And here I have a different point of view than some of my colleagues in philanthropy, and I just should be clear about it. I believe in perpetual institutions. I think if Sloan had not set up a perpetual foundation, we wouldn't be here to do any of the good that we do right now, right? I think that one of my responsibilities as the president of Sloan is to leave my successor with an institution that has the ability to do as much good as the Sloan Foundation is doing today. So the Sloan Foundation is not going to take out bonds in order to increase our grant making as some other foundations are doing right now, because no matter how low the interest rate is, you have to pay the principal back. And I just don't think that I'm confident enough that this is a once in a century crisis that we face now, that we should be taking out a bond to spend a lot of money now that we don't have when the next crisis comes. And I think that crises are going to come much more frequently than we think they are. So, you know, my own view is that we have to be responsible. We spend our 5% every year, up or down. I think of that as a responsibility to the future and a responsibility to future generations. And as I said, intergenerational equity is the way I think of that for us. And I think those are responsibilities. So I want to kind of end there with just a few concluding thoughts. You know, leading a foundation, I feel really lucky to be leading a foundation. I mean, I think that, you know, I've landed in a spot through no fault of my own where I have the opportunity to take this resource that I didn't create, right, and an institution and do some good, right? And I think there's no luckier place to be financially, you know, professionally, than in a place to use somebody else's money to do good in the world. And I wake up every single morning grateful, astonished actually, that I have this opportunity, and grateful for it. But I do think it's important to do that work, as I hope I've conveyed, with a you know, in consideration of, you know, where that fortune came from, what our founder wanted, what the world looks like now. Sloan expected us to adapt and to meet the needs of our society. I was looking for something that I wanted to share with you, and now I can't find it, so I won't. But let me just close then by saying that, you know, if I were to boil down in one sentence what I think we're doing, it's just the sentence that's on the mission page of our website, which is that, I'll read it to you. The Alfred P. Sloan Foundation believes that a carefully reasoned and systematic understanding of the forces of nature and society, when applied inventively and wisely, can lead to a better world for all. And I believe that, and all of us at the Sloan Foundation believe that. And we went through a little branding exercise a couple of years ago, to kind of get something more pithy than that. And we wound up with a tagline that I really like, which is, and this is really where I'll close, that we are driven by the promise of great ideas. And I think we are. I think we're driven. We're passionate about what we do. We like the little Easter egg that cars, General Motors, but we really think that ideas drive us and ideas drive our society. And if we can help make the world better by helping people develop their ideas, we're pretty lucky to do that. So let me close there. So I think that was about the promised length of time, and turn it over to you and whoever is in charge, Joel, I guess, for questions or comments. If you deeply disagree with anything I've said, you should like pipe up and say it.
So we have Matt Hunter. He's our first person to ask a question.
Great.
Hi, Adam. Thanks so much. I'm Matt Hunter. I'm Assistant Vice President of Development for Science and Technology at Duke. I live in Chapel Hill, though, so hopefully that makes me a little bit more worthy in your eyes. But those of us in university development, you know, we're working to raise money for scientific research. We really appreciate the mission of the Science Philanthropy Alliance. However, to date, there really hasn't been a clear, from our view, opportunity for partnership with individual institutions seeking to promote great research to the science philanthropy community. So my question is, do you see this changing at the Alliance in the years ahead, or what advice would you give us relative to leveraging the great work that the Alliance is doing?
That's a great question. And I should, you know, this is something that we've talked about at the Alliance quite a bit, and I'll share this with you. What really is the role of the Alliance meant to be? And it's true, it has not up till now really been a place which is kind of a broker of kind of institutional relationships to philanthropists. And, you know, in the future, we may start to play that role, but I think at the moment we've decided that we want to play a different role, which is to advise philanthropists. And we do this for free, actually, so that there's no sense that we have a vested interest in any direction that they should put their money, right? So we were concerned, we don't want, for example, a philanthropist to think that what I really want is for the Sloan, you know, for this person to come and support something the Sloan Foundation is already supporting, right? And to kind of remain resolutely neutral there. We try to give the philanthropists, and many of them we actually advise anonymously. That is, they want to be anonymous, kind of a help in setting up what they're doing, and then give them the tools to reach out to institutions like Duke and so forth. So you're quite right. We haven't done that, and there's some kind of reasons that we haven't. You know, I think that you know, one could imagine that developing in a different way in the future, but that's where it is right now.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
I think that Hannah Ford had a question to ask.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, Adam. I really enjoyed your talk. I see a lot of talks on Zoom, and you're very energetic. It was great. I felt like you really kept me wanting to keep listening to you. So thank you so much. I'm Hannah Ford. I was a student at Duke, and then I worked at UNC, and now I actually work for the Mellon Foundation. So thanks for the shout out at the beginning and thinking about the complementarity there. So my question, and this. I'm going to ask you two questions, because the first question, I'm not sure if it applies to the world of philanthropy and science, but I'm curious, so I'd like to ask it anyway. And if it doesn't, we could do the second question instead.
Do both.
So, okay, I'll tell you both. Great. So my first question is about on the topic of institutions. In the arts and culture space, we're seeing a huge anti-institution push. And a lot of some of it's in relationship to the diversity, equity, inclusion work, and the idea that institutions are too static, unable to change. And so instead, we need to build new entities and new organizations. So I'm curious if that's something that is also coming up in the space of science. For us, we hear it again and again from individual artists. So I don't know if you hear that from individual scientists. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. That's my first question. And my second one is on this idea of values. We've done a big strategic refresh, and Mellon has new values that we're pushing forward. And I think we're really living them in our grant making, but we're struggling more how to live them in our non-grant making functions at the foundation. So human resources and investments and finance and legal. And I'm curious how you think about the alignment of values across all of the Sloan Foundation. Does it exist? Does it not exist? And how much emphasis do you place on that? So
those are both great questions, Hannah. And let me just start by saying I think the Mellon Foundation is in a really exciting phase, and I think really clearly thinking deeply about what your purpose is and how you're going to live that out. And I think that it must be a very exciting and inspiring place to be at the moment. I do think, with respect to the first question, I do think that there's a difference here between science and any of the arts. I think for a number of reasons. I think one of them is that in science, the kinds of institutions that that I'm thinking of, they provide a lot of infrastructure that you need to do science, right? And whether that's physical infrastructure, human infrastructure, right? Whether they are laboratories or buildings or postdocs, like universities that can host postdocs and students. So there's not the same kind of politics around institutions that I think you might be seeing in the kind of the art space. Having said that, we also we support a lot of much smaller institutions as well, little think tanks, little nonprofits that really are kind of struggling. And one of the things that I'll give you an example. of that, just kind of that's in a different, within our New York City program, we have a small program of grant making in the city. We have been supporting a group called Beta NYC, which is a group that, among other things, we support to teach the neighborhood associations to use all the data that the city collects about everything to advocate for with their representatives for kind of change. And they kind of support themselves with some grants, and they run programs, and the COVID really hit them hard, right? So they couldn't run a lot of their programs. So we came in and made an emergency grant to them, which was really just for core support, for what they were doing to kind of to keep them going. And we fund a lot of little organizations that don't have a lot of people, that are pretty fragile, that do really important things that we care about. So so it's not all the big behemoths and the big universities, but I think the politics is different. I think the second question you raise is really important too. And we've been having really interesting, important conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion within the foundation, and how it affects our grant making, and how it affects our investing, right, in the investment program. We're diverse as a staff in some ways, and not diverse in other ways. I think there's a lot of gender diversity, and I think that's not as, given that we are New York City, I think there's not as much racial and ethnic diversity as there should be. And I think when we turn our staff over pretty slowly, because it's a great place to work, but we're really focused when we make new hires on thinking about issues like that, and then thinking about the nature of our culture. We have a very strong internal culture at Sloan, and that can be wonderful, but I think it also means that we have to ask, is that a culture that's welcoming to everyone? And we try to ask those questions thoughtfully. I think we probably, like almost all privileged institutions, need to do that work better, and I think we're trying to. But I think any institution that's not asking that question of itself every day is missing the moment that we're in a pretty fundamental way.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next question that we have is from Jonathan Weiner.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Mani. Hi, Joel. Thank you. And hi, Adam. It's really a pleasure to get to talk with you. So I'm Jonathan Weiner. I'm a professor in the law school and also the Sanford School of Public Policy and the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke. And I work on the energy, environment, and technology kinds of topics that you are discussing. And I should say also, thank you that I was a grantee of the Sloan Foundation through something called the Society for Risk Analysis 8 years ago for a conference that we held in Asia. But so my question is, hearing all that you said about science and energy and environment and technology issues, but also that management or some issues are not in your domain. I'm wondering how you see the intersection of policy, regulation, law about energy, environment, technology. So for someone like me who studies how the regulatory system addresses risks and addresses emerging technology, is that something that we should try to present to you, or is that out of your, it's not enough hard science?
No, I think that, we do definitely fund scholarly research that that is relevant to these kinds of regulatory issues, right? So I'll give you an example. The grant that we very recently made to the Tobin Center at Yale in economics to develop a program to study the economics around platform, the economics of these platforms. This is in energy, but it's in the technology platforms. In order that economics and studying of their economics would provide a scholarly basis for better regulation of those platforms. And so there's an idea there that what we need to do is develop a kind of a scholarly toolkit that allows people then who want to think about regulation to do that based in economic science. Similarly on the, we don't fund policy advocacy on the energy side, but we are very interested in, and we've been funding the economics of, of these power systems. So we had studied ERCOT. Like when the calamity hit Texas, everybody at the foundation already knew what ERCOT was, right? And because we had been funding people in Texas and elsewhere, but to study the grid, the economics of the grid, the use of the grid. So people who want to regulate the grid, need to understand the economics of, energy economics that underlies it. And so we'll fund that, and then let other people make the policy kind of recommendations.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks.
By the way, if you understood what ERCOT was, you were really terrified of what was happening down there. That was really scary.
Why don't you tell us what it is? I don't know what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, so what happened in Texas with the very cold temperatures was that the grid came close to collapse. And one of the reasons that it could do that is that at Texas, in order to avoid, and so the grid is run by something called ERCOT. I can't remember what it stands for, but in order to avoid any federal regulation, the Texas grid is isolated almost entirely from any other regional grids. So just El Paso is on the west, and there's a little bit that's on the east, but it's really isolated. And one of the things that allowed them to do was to not winterize it and not do not be regulated into winterizing it. And it failed for a number of reasons, but one of them was really that the biggest one was that the natural gas lines froze. And it depends a lot on natural gas. And those lines froze, and they have these rolling blackouts. And these grids, if they collapse entirely, can take months to bring back up. They're very, very delicate. Interestingly, El Paso, which was not on the Texas system, had winterized, they were fine, right? So, and then the governor ran around saying that the whole problem was that the windmills froze, and then the Norwegians pointed out that they had a lot of windmills and it's a little cold in Norway, and they managed to. So it was kind of an intersection. It was the perfect storm, as it was. What happens when you kind of cut yourself off so that you can avoid regulation is that some of those regulations are a pretty good idea. And so it was really quite terrifying in that they came literally within a few seconds of a collapse of the grid. And they had to turn things off at the right way in order to keep that from happening. But they would still be bringing it up if that had happened.
Jonathan, did you finish your question? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And I enjoyed the conversation about the Electricity Reliability Council of Texas too, ERCOT. And yeah, thank you.
The Energy Reliability Council of Texas. Now I remember. It's a bit ironic.
Are there any people standing in line, Imani?
Yes, we have Tom Ross.
Tom Ross.
Yes. Hello.
Hey,
How are you?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Adam. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
I really have a comment more than I do a question. First of all, thank you for joining this seminar. Joel is, as you know, the king of all philanthropy, and we all pay homage as often as we can to the great man that he is. But my comment is this: though you are research oriented for certain, I think people in North Carolina need to know about a grant that you've made to our organization, the Volcker Alliance, which is research, no question about it. But the potential that it has to dig in deep on institutional racism in government hiring is, we hope, going to be significant. We are working with the Behavioral Insights team, along with the state of North Carolina, and their agencies are really very cooperative with us on this, and we're really excited about it. And I think that to me is a good example of how you have used research grants to really potentially affect policy long term. Now, what government wants to do with what we learn will be interesting to follow, but we're going to learn some things that will, I think, surprise people and really help change policy. So thank you for that, but thank you for the work you do in philanthropy overall, because it's a model for those of us who care about the field.
So the Volcker, I mean, we were really happy with that grant. And I think exactly, what you say. I mean, it's kind of meant to underlie the kind of decisions that people, thinking about why do people go into public service and how can we get more to do them. This gives me a chance. I want to plug something that we do that I'm really proud of, which I can be proud of because I didn't invent it. And it kind of goes to this question of public service. So something that the foundation has done for a long time is support the Sloan Public Service Awards in the city of New York. And these awards are given to about 6 people a year who are city workers. So there's more than 250,000 people work for the city of New York. And if you've ever lived in New York, it's just astonishing, right? That the place works, right? There's this, it's enormous, and all this, people have to be educated and kept safe, and the potholes filled, and the buses and the MTA. And I can tell you, over the last year, if you weren't profoundly grateful for the people who make this city work and you lived in this city, you sure are now. I mean, they were extraordinary heroes. And I'm going to say, by the way, that you could tell who was not able to sit at home like I was and do their job in front of a computer, right? And very much disproportionately people who are Black and brown and poor, and that really was driven home to us how this city works. But we make these, we sponsor these public service awards that are given every year that lift up public servants in, I think, a wonderful way, and celebrate them. And the most wonderful part of this is, so we go to the Great Hall of the Cooper Union, and we give these awards out, and there are it's the fund for the city of New York that does it with us, and there are videos. But we get on a bus and we drive to the workplaces of the 6 winners or 7 winners during the day. Like, all of us are on this bus, and you go in, and it's a public health agency, or it's a library, or there was somebody who did education on Rikers Island. We went to Rikers Island, and you see the pride that people have in their colleagues, and how much it means to people to be recognized for this kind of work. And every single year, the single day that lifts me up the most in this job is getting on that bus and visiting these work sites of these extraordinary people who we are lifting up and honoring. And by honoring them, we're honoring everybody, right, in that they work with. And I think that's really important. So that's a very similar kind of spirit to the grant that you're talking about, Tom. That's one of the reasons that we were so pleased to be supporting that work.
Well, and I think, holding up public servants as you do, and Joel is part of the Partnership for Public Service, and they do the same thing with the SAMIs at the federal level. Yeah. And it is extraordinary to watch how people feel as they're being honored, because, many of them work their whole life in, relatively obscure roles and jobs that we don't appreciate enough. So thank you for doing that too. It's a real tribute. Did you think about that? So. I
was a Sammy's judge one year, and boy, did I not feel like I had put my life to particularly good use when I saw those candidates.
No kidding.
By the way, we also do a similar program for public school teachers, the Sloan Public School Teaching Awards, which are in STEM, and also there's another version in economics, and those are very moving as well.
Thank you. Imani, any other people in line?
Yes, I'm Ryan Comfort.
Ryan, all the way from California.
That's right. Hi, everyone. Adam, thanks for a really great presentation and enjoying the questions and answers. I'm going to follow Hannah's lead, and I actually have 2 questions too. So mine are in the sphere of just philanthropy as a field more generally. So the first one is with the Philanthropy Alliance. Or the Science Philanthropy Alliance, are you finding the kind of questions and what people are looking for evolving over time? And maybe even in some case, people are just trying to have it be easier to give money away instead of having to build their own institution. So that's question 1. And then the second question is, have you all considered looking at science, technology, and economics for the field of philanthropy? So what kind of research on the field of philanthropy could inform better giving in the future?
So again, those are great questions. Let me say, with respect to the first, it's really, I used to, I ran a college, I ran a School of Arts and Sciences. I ran a college. I probably raised $1 billion from alumni over that period of time. I got very used to kind of talking with people about what they wanted to do with their money. One of the reasons I liked fundraising, I got some very good dinners out of it, and I met some wonderful people. But what I came to realize was that when people made a gift, it was a happy day for them, right? It wasn't like I was selling them life insurance, right? People signed that gift agreement. They were lifted up, and the reason they were lifted up was that they had found a way to take something sterile, which is money, and turn it into something, connect it to something that they value. So I think what we find when we work with these philanthropists, they've often made a lot of money, more than they ever imagined that they would have. They genuinely want to do something good with it. And a lot of the educational process with them is kind of helping them understand why basic research and not just applied research is impactful and meaningful, right? So that's kind of a first hurdle you have to get over, because I mean, it's nothing wrong with applied research, but often people first think, well, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, so I'm going to give it to clinical work in Alzheimer's or for translational work in Alzheimer's. And you want to have a conversation with them about why that's very valuable to do, but it's also valuable to just give it to neuroscientists who are trying to understand brain, right? So that's kind of a first part. And I think they come to us because they have some instinct around that, but they want to see that kind of developed. The second goes to another piece of what you said, which is that often these are people, again, wonderful people, but they built an institution. And so their first instinct can be, I want to build something, right? Something new, something of my own. And one of the most rewarding kinds of conversations you can have is where you can persuade you kind of help them understand that there are models out there which are already really good, and that you don't have to build your own institution or give it to one of about 4 or 5 places that feel safe to give it to. So I'll kind of mention an example because it might be helpful to understand. I don't want to go on too much length about this, but this is all on the Science Philanthropy Alliance website. They're kind of a blog series about it, so I think it's okay. We were working with someone, and I got to know him pretty well, named Ross Brown, who had made a lot of money in the doing something useful. Like he built things. I can't remember what he built, but he actually produced a thing of value and sold it, which I have a lot of respect for, I gotta say. So he had this idea that he wanted to support people who were really bright and had a really big idea that they couldn't get support for, who were kind of in mid-career, not the youngest people, but like you get tenure and then you want to restart and go in a new direction, and how do you do that? And initially in our conversations with him, he had this, I want to set up a thing to do this. We convinced him that a good place to start would be to sit down with the Packard Foundation, which does not, they were doing an early career thing, but to kind of, why don't you try to see what it would be like to fund a couple of extra Packard fellows and sit in the room with them and see how they do that work. And he kind of learned a lot from that. And in the end has now set up, I can't remember the exact structure, but a very lean structure that mirrors the way that Packard does it, with a science advisory committee that we helped him, the Science Philanthropy Alliance helped him put together, and has started making these grants, 2 terrific grants in this first year, to kind of young, recently tenured scientists who want to start in a new direction. So often that's meant to just give you an example of how and he feels great about it. He's so excited because, again, he's taken his money in it, he's seen it kind of put to work in the way that he had envisioned. And it's a lot harder to get their heads around that if you haven't been in that world than it is to give to the American Cancer Society, which is a wonderful organization, but wasn't quite what he had in mind. So I don't know if that's helpful or responsive to kind of what you're asking. The second question is about turning that lens on science, that analytical lens on science philanthropy itself. And I think that's very interesting. There is, we've become involved with a group called the Research on Research Institute, RORI, which has been set up by led by the Wellcome Trust in England. And they're interested in general on kind of research on how you do research. But there's a piece of that is actually to use the kind of databases of some of the foundations that are participating as places to do research into how foundations themselves operate, and even run experiments. So, for example, I think this is public. The Volkswagen Foundation has announced that they're going to do, which is a huge foundation in Europe. They're going to make some of their grants randomly. And to see, right, there's this idea like, we do all of this peer review. God knows we do it at Sloan. We believe in it. But, at some point, are you gilding the lily, and do you really not know as much as you think you do about who's going to be successful? And so they're going to do a kind of a randomized controlled trial where they do some random grant making and really study it, right? And so there is some of that's going on out there. I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting. I don't want to overstate kind of how scientific philanthropy and science philanthropy, or science grant making in the agencies for that matter, can really ever be, right? I think one of the most important things I think we need to be learning is how our implicit biases are skewing our grant making in ways that are disadvantaging people who are, women and people of color. And I think we have every reason to believe that since in our society, we do this in every part of our society, that we do this in our grant making as well. And so they're turning that lens there. Some of that is less about kind of doing kind of really rigorous research, and some of it is Isaac Simons, for example, has done some really interesting work around one of their programs, which is a kind of an early career program, and kind of thinking about all the places that turning that lens on themselves, that implicit bias had been, various kinds of biases had come in to their program. It was a kind of, this is in astrophysics, and they did this, and the next year they had much better diversity in the work they were doing. So some of that work you're talking about takes place in the small, within foundations, kind of looking at their own activities, and some of it, say through RORI, is taking place on a larger scale.
Anybody else? I asked that question because I'm going to ask something, and I don't want to get ahead of anybody else.
No, that's it.
That's it. Okay, so I have two questions for you, Adam.
Yeah.
The first question is, how did it come about that the Sloan Foundation is so much deeply engaged in a variety of kinds of programs? Although, I mean, I see the logic that holds them together in terms of the framework that you mentioned earlier, but it's very different from most other foundations, which they believe that they have 4 or 5 major programs, that's it, and they shouldn't be doing anything else. So the first question is, how did the Alfred Sloan Foundation reach the model of doing what you're doing with its many manifestations? And the second is, to what extent is everything that you're doing a function of what Alfred P. Sloan started and wanted to do?
So those are the second question is kind of the answer to the first. So those are great questions, and I think the shape of what we do really goes back to Alfred P. Sloan himself. And so if you're going to look like the origins, it's kind of interesting actually, some of the origins of what he thought was important in the kind of the post-war world. He was a committed capitalist. He did not like the government regulation of the economy, and he was not a fan of the New Deal. He in fact rescued Ford early, at some point, I think after the war, because he was so concerned that if Ford failed, that he would become a monopoly at General Motors and would get regulated. So he had figured out how to run a car company, and those clowns at Ford had not. So he sent his managers over to Ford to teach him how to run a car company so he could have some competition. So, he felt that strongly about it. So he was interested after the war in economic research, but he was also interested in educating people from his point of view. I'm not sure I will say I don't share his point of view on all of these issues, But no matter, he was interested in educating people about the importance of the free enterprise system. So that whole public understanding program started out as the public understanding of economics. There were comic books that explained free enterprise that he wanted, that the Sloan Foundation kind of sponsored, paid for, or produced. I can't remember. I don't know how that went, but got out there, and that was the start of the public understanding program. Similarly, this, as I mentioned, the gifts to women's colleges for economics were about kind of his view of economics. So I think it started with him largely around economics, and I think he understood that that research and public understanding and education, all of these things really went together. And then when his interests and the foundation's interests broadened to science, I mean, first through medicine and then into science, leaving medicine aside, that same larger holistic way of understanding what it meant to support these disciplines, the disciplines themselves, the institutions, the understanding of them, came along as a core value of the foundation. The diversity and equity and inclusion part, which I kind of mentioned, went back to United Negro College Fund support. That was his own value. He was a capitalist, but he really believed it. And he really believed that the only way that capitalism was going to work was if everybody was truly given the same opportunity to participate in that system. And he looked out at the world, and that's not what he saw. And that offended him, right? And one of the things that is in our history that I'm the most proud of is that, as you probably know, during the resistance to school integration, Prince Edward County in Virginia closed their public schools, and so they wouldn't integrate them. And then they gave vouchers to everyone. Of course, the white kids could take their vouchers to private schools. There weren't any private schools that would accept Black kids. And so this was just, horrible kind of situation there. And it was for 5 years. Well, the Sloan Foundation participated, was one of the participants in making grants to reopen those schools, right? So, he was in many ways just conservative about a lot of things, but he looked out at our society and did not like what he saw in terms of racism and inequity. And he in this particularly capitalistic way wanted to do something about it and saw it as integral to the mission of the foundation. So we've inherited that perspective from him.
So is it fair to say that everything, or virtually everything, people are doing is somehow related to something that he was interested in?
I think probably at some level that's true. I think a lot of things that we do, it's been a half a century. But I would say it's true at a kind of a spiritual and intentional way. We do a lot of support for kind of technological infrastructure and that supports science. I like to think that he would have thought that was important. A little hard to know what Jupyter Laboratory notebooks and open source tools for privacy preserving use of data. If he would have thought that, I don't know what he would have made of that, but I like to think that he would have understood why, and I genuinely think that he would have understood why in 2021, these were the kinds of issues that a foundation founded on the kinds of values and interests that he had should be supporting. So I think so, yeah.
I've always felt it was the example that I mentioned earlier of the public understanding of science, which has adapted generation by generation with new technologies, new ways of expressing it in a way that I think other foundations do not seem to be as comfortable doing. I mean, that is a remarkable kind of sense. When Andrew Carnegie gave his money to the foundations and the Carnegie Corporation in particular, he wrote a letter to the trustees and said, I don't want you to try to figure out what I would do. I want you to use your judgment, he said. He said, I want this money. You know what I cared about. I want you to adapt what you do to the needs of changing times. And that's my mission for you. And I don't know that Alfred P. Sloan said the same kind of thing, but that certainly seems to be in its DNA.
Yeah, I think, he didn't say it quite as eloquently or kind of pithily as in that one letter as Carnegie did. But if we look back at the kind of the documents that were around at the time, that is what he believed it needed to change over time. He was clear about what he valued. And I think that he didn't create some endowment to I remember when I was at Williams, we had an endowment that purchased cookbooks, right? And so someone had created an endowment to buy cookbooks for the library. And at some point, you're just like, well, we don't need more cookbooks. And these weren't like, Betty Crocker, right? These were old, like historical cookbooks, as they were interested in the history of food. And so there's a way in which, and the person who done, I'm sure they had passion for cookbooks and they thought they were doing a great thing and like this, people are going to love this, but it had been like 70 years, right? So perpetuity is a long time. And, I think, Carnegie letter you talk about is it's perfect, right? It's absolutely perfect. And that is the spirit of Alfred P. Sloan as well. And it's very much what he had in mind for how the foundation was going to develop. I'm so happy you're mentioning the public understanding program. I do want to say one more word about it because I think it's quite remarkable. I mean, we do in that program try to embrace all of the parts of culture that people can get exposure to science and scientists through. So, and I do think what makes us different from a lot of foundations is this idea, a lot of wonderful places that support this kind of public understanding of science, think about documentaries and they think about explaining, all right? I mentioned this before and I don't want to repeat myself, but then better explaining, right? And I love good explaining. I used to teach quantum mechanics. There's like no substitute for explaining it well. I'm not opposed to explaining, but it's limited, right? And if, we supported a play a couple of years ago called Behind the Sheet, which was about Sims, or is kind of about Sims, who Marion Sims, who invented a set of gynecological procedures and had a statue in Central Park. Well, it turns out that he did this by experimenting on enslaved women and without anesthesia. And this was a play that was written by a young African-American playwright, a wonderful, astonishing play that was put on in a small theater here in New York about him. And it centers the experience of these women. So it's about these women who he's experimenting on who were enslaved, and he plays a role, but it's centered on them. It's a very powerful play. And we actually extended the run. We supported it a number of times. It's now LA Theater Works, which if you look that up, does recordings of plays, has done a recording of it. That is a way of getting people to think about all sorts of medical ethics issues and social issues that the best article in JAMA will not get you to think about.
Yeah.
And I think that it transforms you to see this play precisely because it's in a different art form, right? It's in an art form that you open yourself to in a way that the kind of explaining way of getting at things you don't open yourself to. So, we've recognized that these kinds of art forms have a power for getting people to think about scientific issues that we really care about. The other thing is that the science has to be right. Like you can't futz around with that. And every time we support something, if we think there's any need to, we'll pay for a science advisor, right? So that every word of science in a play or in a book or in a TV show is right. And people need, if it's Sloan supported, nobody has futzed with that, right? And that's really important too, right? That it's right. That people be able to feel that way about the science that they see. So I'm very proud of that program. I do think, Joel, it's totally unique. And I thank you for giving me a chance to talk about it for a couple of minutes here at the end.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, it is, you're familiar with many other foundations too. When I think about the difference between a foundation that is open to the variety of objectives that you all even if there's coherence in any event, as you make a good case for. And the typical foundation, which doesn't do that, it seems to me that they're both valid models, but I wish there were more foundations like the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation that recognized the variety of things that can be done consonant with what the founders wanted to do if they simply thought about adaptation to changing times. So just,
thank you. Yeah, I love that aspect of our culture, Joel. And again, every foundation should know what it is and what it's not. And I think that, you know, I often say to people, there are many things that are worth doing that we don't do, right? But I think everything that we do is worth doing. And I think that's a good place to be.
well, we have only 3 minutes left. So if anybody has an urgent question you haven't asked, now is the time to do it, because the door is going to be closing very quickly. So this is your last chance. Anybody?
Jerry?
Jerry?
Thanks for the talk, Adam. Yeah, I was just curious if you thought about the, you know, I went to high school in Northern Virginia, so I'm kind of following what's going on there with the TJ, the admissions policy there. And I know that you have a background in higher ed and science, so just wondering if you've any of your thoughts on, you know, they're really trying to be more diverse, and they're kind of changing it from a standardized testing into lottery system and kind of balancing the two. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
So, and thank you. So I'll be real quick, and that's really important. I saw your question in the chat. I don't know anything about the particular case you're talking about, but what I will say is that there's no question that standardized testing is used at almost every level, whether consciously or not, to preserve the inequities in our educational system. And you know, the younger people, I mean, I live in New York City where they do standardized tests. Yeah, they do admissions for 4-year-olds into kindergarten. It's preposterous, right? And you know, I don't have any easy answers. I think that at some level, every evaluation system is going to privilege those who have the resources to prepare for it. So it's not that, you know, standardized testing by itself is an evil thing, but the systems within which standardized testing are taking place are really locking in inequities in our society. So any institution that is looking really hard at that and trying to change it, I applaud that effort. I can't speak to any particular decisions that are made, you know, was this a good or a bad idea? I don't know enough about it. But I do think our school systems need to be looking really, really, really hard at the effects of how they slot people in. I'll say in New York City, it's terrible. And it's a terrible system that on the surface of it looks like a meritocracy. And deep down, it just reinforces every inequity in our society, in our city. So maybe I hope that's an adequate answer to the question you're asking.
Well, it's a wonderful point on which to close, and give me a chance to say how deeply grateful I am to you, Adam, for coming. It was a very inspiring, insightful presentation, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody who participated in this also learned a lot. So thank you very much for coming back. No, I'm saying thank you, and think about coming back when we invite you the next time, when we're in person.
Thank you all very much. I enjoyed meeting all of you, and I look forward to another opportunity to talk with you. And Joel, thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciated it too, and so do all of you. And I thank you all for coming. I look forward to seeing you next year when we have another exciting series of speakers coming, and we'll send you more information about that later on. Meanwhile, stay in touch and everybody have a wonderful summer. And we hope that next time we meet, it will be in person again. Thanks very much. All the best. Bye-bye.